Just because you called your ex and said, hey, I lost my job, or hey, my car broke and I need the extra money to fix my car. Can you give me a break on child support this month? That doesn't mean that you actually got a break in child support.
Right.
Welcome back, guys, to Cases and Cocktails. This is episode 10 today. I'm Bryan Eggleston. This is my beautiful wife, Janice Eggleston. How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. Doing great. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about child support.
Fun.
Right? Financial side of parenting here in the great state of Texas. And to do that today, we've got a different cocktail. What is it?
This is a Cuba Libre.
Basics.
Rum, Coke, and lime.
Nice.
Basics. I think last time we did kind of a beach drink too. I think I'm tired of the cold weather.
Oh, nice.
Someone's birthday's coming up, so maybe we can.
How old are you going to be?
Doesn't even matter.
Doesn't it?
No.
Doesn't it, though?
No.
Not at all?
Old enough to be able to deserve to be on a beach.
That's fair. That's fair. Here.
Cheers.
See if that gets you a little bit closer. Rum? All right. Rum, Coke. All right. I can do that. I can do that all day.
Rum, Coke, lime. Oh, yeah.
All right.
What are we talking about?
We're going to do child support. Let's talk a little bit about how it's calculated, and then we'll talk about how it's enforced and maybe how it's modified a little bit. I was in thinking about this topic, I immediately went to when we were first starting out as lawyers.
Oh, gosh.
And I had a lot of cases in the Travis County Child Support Court, Title 4D court.
Yes.
Over there off Post Oak.
I had some of them, and then I think I quickly gave all of them to you and said I will stop lawyering if I have to ever go back there.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I learned a lot. There was a judge, Judge Waterhouse. I learned a lot from her, watching her. And it was great. I remember watching her put people in jail for not paying child support. And she very systematic. She was very gracious about it. But you could see, and what's funny is people would go up and do the same thing, and she would just do the same sort of mental logistical trap
on the same day, right?
Yeah,
They've
same
got
day.
thousands
Yeah,
of cases.
just over and over.
Clearly,
and over.
no one's watching what's going on ahead of them.
It was great. So, if you're out there, Judge Waterhouse, thank you for that. So, all right, child support. State of Texas, it's not. I won't say simple, but it's set out in the legislature, right? They have statutory guidelines for calculating child support, and
if the judge orders guideline support, it's just a math problem, right?
Yeah, it's a math problem, and that math problem includes the following sort of like pieces, right? So you have your income, and income is everything.
Yep.
It's your net income, net resources, and it's everything. So any money that's coming in gets calculated towards it. And that's funny because a lot of people don't think that's a true statement, but it's a true statement. So it's everything. And then the amount of children that you have in this case, in the case that you're calculating the child support, and the amount of children that you have that you're taking care of outside of it will determine that as well, right?
Yep. But generally speaking, right, if you have a parent that's ordered to pay guideline child support for one kid, 20%. And if they don't have any other children that they're supporting. So I always tell potentials that you take a rough estimate is take your net resources, subtract whatever you're paying monthly in health insurance for the kiddo. 20% of that is a real rough number.
Yeah. Yeah. You get credits for health insurance. It's net resources. So they take out your statutory deductions and that sort of stuff.
Which aren't always the same deductions that are reflected on your paycheck,
right,
because you have some control over that based on how you're handling paying the government.
Right. And it's also, your 401k deductions,
Mhm.
withholdings, they don't count towards the statutory deductions and that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit,
Right.
you
Just
look,
because you are paying, a third
right,
of your paycheck towards your 401k doesn't
right,
mean that that gets deducted from your
right.
gross to figure out what your net is.
Um, that's sort of the statutory guideline support system that's promulgated in the family code. It's people refer to all the time. You're in court, or even in mediation, people say, okay, just so and so will pay. This parent will pay guideline support. You may not even know what that number is, right? You kind of have an idea, but you calculate it. Um,
It's 20% for one kiddo, and then it goes up 5% for each additional kiddo until you hit 40%.
yeah. Um, there are instances where you will deviate from statutory guidelines,
Yes.
either by agreement or the court can do that.
Yeah. Sometimes, if a court orders a 50-50 visitation schedule, they'll take that into consideration and say, okay, guideline, because in the code, right, it's presumed that standard possession order and guideline child support are in the best interest of the kiddo, and then we go from there. But there's nothing in the code that says, okay, but that's only if this is a child support number, only if you're doing a standard possession order or expanded standard. If you're doing a 50-50, it changes to this.
Right.
So that's kind of hard to explain to clients sometimes when you go into court. If you want 50-50 possession and access, that's all fine and well, but that doesn't necessarily have a direct correlation to how much you're going to pay in support. It
No,
can.
right. And actually we had a case recently. It went through arbitration, but it our client was the person that had visitation,
Hmm.
and the so she we call her the non-custodial parent. The primary parent was opposing party, and opposing party was paying, or was ordered to pay our client child support based on the difference in incomes and some other factors. And so
What was their visitation schedule like?
um, our client ended up with an expanded standard possession order.
Hmm.
And again, it went through arbitration, so not necessarily through a judge. A judge will sign off on it eventually, but um,
That's a little unique.
it is. It's a different type of case, and so there are nuances, right? There are things. There's always, it depends, right? That's the answer. It depends, but it is a math problem. The court also will take into consideration things like where people live, how far apart people live, what the cost is to exercise visitation, that sort of stuff that can be taken into account.
Yeah, if one person moved,
Right,
if they followed the order, but they don't maybe have a geographic restriction, they moved across the country. Now the parent that's visiting, their cost just to exercise possession and access has gone up astronomically.
right,
That's going to get taken into
right.
consideration for sure.
The other thing too is that sometimes kiddos will need a little bit extra help, whether it's
Hmm.
with health issues or cognitive issues, that sort of stuff. That gets taken into account, and that actually changes some things. If the child's disabled, that changes sort of the limitations in terms of child support as well.
How much, when it ends, all of it. Yeah. Something that I often have to walk through with my clients. Uh, there is a belief, a false belief, that your budget or how much your expenses are should be taken into consideration when determining child support. And as you know, that's just not the case. I looked at more than one client and told them, well, it sounds like you've got a budgeting issue and you probably need to lower your expenses, right? They'll
Yeah.
sit down with me and say, look, this is what I make. These are my monthly expenses. I don't have that extra X number of dollars to pay in child support at the end of the month. So
Right.
clearly, if we just show this to the judge, that's going to have a huge impact. Well, it's not. The judge is going to look at it and say, your child still needs food, shelter, and clothing, and you're going to have to pay that based on a certain proportion of what you make.
Right. No, that's 100% right. And having that reasonable expectation going in is important, right? Going into court, it's also really important when you're talking about trying to reach an agreement. Go to mediation, something like that. understanding what your exposure there is,
Mhm.
right, is really important, and understanding what reasonable expectation of what to receive, right. Let's talk a little bit. That's kind of how it's calculated. And obviously, the other thing, just real fast too, you can go online and there's all these great calculators,
The
right?
AG's
Yeah, the,
office
the
has one.
AG's got a calculator.
Mhm.
A lot of you can go online and find these as well. Um, the code actually tells you exactly how to do this calculation. I will just tell you, in 14 years, I don't think anyone's ever done it the same way twice. So I just I
That's fair.
I've been in court before, and the judge has a number, opposing counsel has a number, and I have a number,
And
right?
they're all
And
usually within a few dollars or tens of
yeah,
dollars, but it is surprising how often that
yeah,
happens.
it happens all the time. I think it's great. It's absolutely fantastic. So don't just trust whatever number you see online, right? So that's the other thing. Um, so let's talk a little bit about enforcements,
Okay, so
right?
enforcement, if one party is ordered to pay support and they're not, if you are one payment, if you're a payment behind of at least 30 days, then you can file an enforcement, right?
Right,
What is the relief you can ask for? What is people always say, what's the punishment here?
right, yeah,
And how do I get my money?
right,
So you file an enforcement and have them served, go in for a hearing, and you can ask the judge for a lot of different things, everything from a contempt finding to them obviously having to pay the support, potentially pay fines, interest, and the ultimate one that everyone wants to talk about is jail time. We don't have debtors jail in Texas unless we're talking about child support, and in that case, they can throw you in jail for 6 months.
yeah. The courts look at it, and the law looks at it as it's not a debt; it's an obligation,
Hmm.
and you fail to pay your obligation, and or to comply with your obligation, and they can put you in jail for that. And we talk about it all the time. We talk about it's the biggest stick that you can carry. It's ugly. It's definitely not going to help your co-parenting dynamic when you tell the other person you want them to go to jail. They obviously probably had something to do with getting into that situation by not paying their child support, right? So it's not like you're just asking to throw someone in jail for no reason. Um,
But
uh,
it's a double-edged sword because, yes, you want them to understand that this is a court order and there are potential punishments. So you need to take this obligation seriously. But the other side is if they're sitting in jail, they're not working and you're probably not getting that money either.
right. Yeah. We talk about it all the time. I talk about it with my clients about, hey, look, if we're going to enforce child support, first of all, what's the number? There's a cost benefit analysis.
Yes.
Two, are they making payments in any capacity? Um, Coach Mosley from my high school basketball years yelled at me for 4 years every year that one in the hand is better than two in the bush. And if they're making the payments, but they're a little behind here and there, that one in the hand is better than two in the bush because at some point, like you said, they go to jail, they're going to give you zero.
And you're going to have to pay an attorney to file the enforcement. And yes, one of the things the judge can do, especially if there is a contempt finding, you'll get awarded attorney's fees, but that's a number on a piece of paper. And if this person is just blatantly ignoring a child support obligation that they could be thrown in jail for, it's not very likely probably that they're going to pay an attorney's fees judgment
Right.
for which you don't have, as you said it, that big of a stick.
Right. It's an interesting dynamic though, but the way to enforce it is to go through the court.
Mhm.
You can't withhold possession access if they're not paying child support. Um, you can be held in contempt for doing that, right?
Mhm.
The one doesn't make the other one right. Two wrongs don't make a right.
No, and when you do go in for an enforcement on child support, you're basically giving up some of the relief that you could be entitled to because it's going to be a wash. Because if the other side can prove that you violated the order and files their own
Right.
enforcement, then the judge, is likely to say, okay, either you're both going to have contempt findings or even neither. And, I'm not ordering anyone to pay attorney's fees because you both did wrong. You can't self help in that way.
I want to talk a little bit about the other side of an enforcement. So let's say hypothetically you have an obligation, but
Mhm.
then you lose your job
Mhm.
or you can't make a payment for whatever reason, and you have an enforcement. You need to understand that you can go to jail, right? That's the thing. You can go to jail. Um, Also, by the way, the thing you need to keep in mind is just because you called your ex and said, "Hey, I lost my job," or "Hey, my car broke and I need the extra money to fix my car. Can you give me a break on child support this
Mhm.
month?" That doesn't mean that you actually got a break in child support.
Right. Because generally speaking, the state disbursement unit is tracking all the payments, and the Office of the Attorney General is going to log it as an arrearage.
As a rearage, but more importantly, that agreement doesn't
Amend the court order.
amend the court or
Mhm.
change it, and it doesn't absolve you of your obligation. And so, you may have an agreement then, but then 6 months from now, you may not have that agreement anymore, and then you can still be held in contempt for not paying your child support.
You always want to consult an attorney when you get into that space to make sure that whatever you're doing to try to get through that financial struggle isn't going to come back and bite you
Right.
later.
And you have limited defenses. One of the defenses is the inability to
Mhm.
pay, but it's not just, you don't just pull out your pockets and say, "Oh, I didn't have any money."
Now we're going through your bank statements, your credit card statements. We're going through your bills, right? Where do you live? How much are your bills? And if those add up to more than what you're making, the judge is going to look at you too and say, well, how are you paying these bills? And then it might look like you're doing something nefarious or keeping things from the court. Now your credibility is at issue.
Well, and the other thing is too, is that, that's not just, I don't have the ability to pay today. You got to go back. It's very tedious. You got to go
Right.
back, show every time that it was owed, that you couldn't pay at that time. And it's
Mhm.
not just that you didn't have the money. You also, the law says you got to try to beg, borrow, and steal basically in order to do it,
If
right?
you could have borrowed money
Right.
from a family member or a friend, now your inability to pay defense is out the window.
100%. And you've got to show that you tried to do those things.
Mhm.
So it's a lot. I want to get back to this because I think again, I was thinking about this and it just sort of really, I guess, nostalgia. I don't know. Um, you know, Judge Waterhouse used to get people up there and they'd get the obligors, the people that owe the child support. And they'd say, "Well, I don't have any money." She would say, "Okay." And she would lean up over the bench a little bit, and she'd say, "Well, where did you sleep last night?" And they'd say, "Well, my apartment or my house." So, "Did you eat last night?" "I did." "Did you eat this morning?" "Oh, had a something on the go." "How'd you get here today?" "Oh, I drove down here." "Did you stop and get gas today?" "No, I didn't need gas today." Okay. She'd go through this list and she'd say, "Well, sir or ma'am, your children need a place to live. Your children need food to eat, and your children need to go to school, and the way to get there, and go through all things, and you obviously were able to do it, but your children weren't." And she would do the same thing, and you knew when she was doing it, and it's like watching it's like watching 2 seconds before the train wreck, right? Like, you can see it coming down the line, and you wanna step in, and I saw her do it over and over again. My point of that is that's the level, right, of inability to pay that you gotta get to.
Absolutely.
You gotta show that you have absolutely had no way.
Not just after paying your bills, you were out of money.
Right,
That's not
right,
enough.
100%. So, let's talk a little bit then, about modifications.
Mhm.
How to modify the child support, that sort of stuff. Um, you know, it happens, right? It happens. You get different jobs. People, lose their jobs, change jobs.
If you've got an increase or decrease in your income, there's certain percentages and numbers that you look at, but there are metrics that are taken into consideration that would allow you to go in and file a modification. And then the other is time. Once 3 years have passed since your old order was entered, then you don't have to talk about, meeting certain metrics for a modification as far as the income increase or decrease. You can come in and you can have that recalculated.
Right. And it is, um, it's generally, as long as there's a significant change, material substantial change to your income, then it can be modified. That goes away, like you said, after 3 years, and is you can have it reevaluated. Uh, I'll be honest with you though, when you do a modification on either side, right? On either side, you're gonna engage in litigation, and it's going to be, really tedious and intensive. Look through both sides, both parties' financials, right? They're going to want to see all the income that one party has or other has. The other side's going to want to see all the expenses, right? And do the things. One thing that we see a lot of, and in fact, I was just the other day, I was working through an order where the other side wants our client to pay child support, but also for extracurricular activities. And that's not what child support's covered, just child support. And here's the dollars to the other parent, and they do whatever they want to with it. There's no limitations on that. There's no reporting on what they do with it.
Can't force the side that is receiving child support to put it in a specific account and allot certain dollars for kid expenses. I mean, they can take that money and book a trip.
Right, 100%. And so then you start talking about, okay, well, I want him, little Johnny or little Susie's playing, sports or, piano or, ballet, whatever they're doing. And now there's more, we need more money and that sort of stuff. And that needs to be taken into consideration. But also at the same time, you're creating a lot of power dynamics
Yes.
between the parties, ways to
Who gets to decide what extracurricular and what expenses are necessary for the extracurricular?
right.
It gets very hairy.
Yeah. And so at some point, it's something to think about, something that goes into the sort of the calculus that goes into creating child support, modifying child support. Obviously, changes in custody, right, can create a material substantial change where you need to alter child support and that sort of stuff. Just as a quick aside, the thing that typically gets done, not always, but typically it gets done, like you said earlier, the one parent pays child support. They don't pay it directly to the other parent. They pay it through the state disbursement unit.
Hopefully.
Right.
I just got a case and it's been 7 years and they have all been direct payments.
Yeah. And the reason
It's
that's terrible,
literally, and
right.
they agreed to that and agreed that that's best. And he has been Venmoing payments for 7 years. And the AG's office has him in the arrears and he couldn't renew his driver's license.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is that the reason we go through the SDU or the state disbursement unit is because they track, they basically account for all the dollars, and they get the money and then they give it to the obligee or the parent that's receiving the child support. But there's an accounting there, right? And the issue is when you talk about modification or you talk about enforcement, you have to account for all these dollars,
Right.
and more importantly, you got to account for when they were paid. When it wasn't paid, interest gets accrued on it.
That it was a payment for child support and not
here's $200 for your birthday, right?
100%.
So, that's sort of the thing. And then the Office of the Attorney General then uses that accounting to then kind of do some things. Like you said, you can have your driver's license, you can have your passport suspended, and that sort of stuff. And so, or, those are things that happen. Quite frankly, our hope is, like you said, that you're going through the SDU, right, and making the payments and doing the things. You'll have withholdings, right? Oftentimes this will come directly out, and they'll set it up where it comes out from your employer. But if your employer doesn't pay it, or you don't make enough money to cover your entire obligation,
Because they can only hold half of your paycheck.
then you got to pay the rest.
Yeah,
You're
it's still on you to go
still
do
on the hook for it. And if you're not making that payment, you're on the hook to go do a modification, right? You don't get to say, well, I lost my job
a year ago,
and so let's go back. And so it gets tedious. At the end of the day, it should be a math problem. There's a lot of feelings that go into that math problem, but it should be a math.
That's an important part of it. People in our society have a lot of feelings attached to finances, and it's hard. But one of the things that we try to, at least I try to talk to clients about when talking about how much you're going to pay in child support or what the interest looks like is this is a math problem and you can have feelings about it, but the judge, that's not going to be impactful for the judge. That's not going to move the needle and release you of an obligation.
All right. I could probably spend another 2-3 days talking about child support. There's a lot of nuances that go into it, particularly enforcements. I get a lot into that. Let's do this. Let's do some questions.
Okay, and these are questions either that clients or potentials have asked us often, or that people on social media have engaged us with. So people want to hear these answers.
All right.
I'm going to ask you a question first. I think we talked about it at the beginning
Hmm.
today, but maybe you
Good
can
and easy one. I can do easy.
briefly summarize.
Briefly, we just replay. See above.
The question is, how is child support calculated in Texas?
Child support, typically you use the statutory guidelines, and basically you take your net resources and take out the statutory deductions, and you give a credit for any health insurance paid towards the children and the children only. And that
Good
typically,
caveat.
and then, right. And then you apply the statutory guideline percentage based on how many kids you're paying child support in this case, and any other kids you may have child support obligation owed to, or that you're supporting otherwise. That's how you get the number. There's caps on where that's applied, and there's obviously factors where you can deviate from the statutory guidelines. But that's sort of how you start, anyways.
It's a good summary.
Nailed it.
My turn.
That's it.
That's it.
Oh, that was easy. What happens if the other parent refuses to pay child support, homie?
Nothing happens on its own.
There you go.
But if you are paying through the state disbursement unit and the family is receiving some type of state aid, now you've got a state interest, which is always fun. The Office of the Attorney General could on their own file a motion for enforcement, or the obligee, the party that is supposed to receive the payment, can on their own go in and file a motion for enforcement and ask for certain relief from the court, such as contempt findings, jail time, interest, attorney's fees.
You nailed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, crushed it.
I've got another one for you. Ready?
Hold on one second. The state can file it on their own. That's fun, isn't it?
It is. They can file initial custody cases too.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
But that's for a whole nother day. We can't get into all that.
The office of the Attorney General, though, they have a child support division, and they do that. They are overworked and under-resourced. Like I said, they also track through the state disbursement unit all the money, and they can bring their own enforcement, particularly if you're receiving state aid. So, hey man, it's awesome.
You ready for another one? We
Yeah.
covered this one too, but
Let's do it.
good summary. You ready?
All right.
Can child support amounts be modified after a divorce?
Oh yeah. So child support can be modified. You need a material substantial change after 3 years. You don't need a material substantial change in order to do that. The material substantial change is change in circumstances, but more importantly, your income or someone's really it's income based expenses as well. Modification, it is opening up a new custody case in order to change your child support obligation. So it's not just
because as soon as you open it up, the other side is going to start making complaints about something as far as rights and duties or visitation. And not that, if you meet your metric to come in and modify child support, that doesn't automatically mean that the other side meets their metric and now they can come in and ask to modify anything. They still have to meet their burden and come in. But it's very rare, very, very rare that I've ever seen a case where all we're talking about is modifying child support and nothing else.
Yeah, it really does. It's a space where you are creating an opportunity to engage in more litigation above and beyond this. But I'll say this, you have to do it because informal agreements, they don't work. The Office of the Attorney General is not going to accept that. The courts don't accept that. Also, it's your burden, particularly if you're the obligor. If you owe child support and you cannot meet your obligation, you need to go and modify that because the other side can enforce it.
So even if you've got a real amicable relationship and you do a great job co-parenting, if there is going to be a deviation from the court order as far as support is concerned, consult with an attorney, make sure you're covering all your bases. And just consulting with a lawyer doesn't mean that you're going to file a case. It just means that you're being as informed as possible, covering your butt.
Exactly. Last question. You ready?
Ready.
What penalties, if any, are there for not disclosing accurate income in a child support case? So basically lying, right? You lie about your income.
Well, if we're talking about the case, if the case is still open and it's not yet been finalized, obviously your credibility is now at issue, and the judge is less likely to believe anything that's coming out of your mouth. You can be held in contempt. Um, I guess technically we can talk about perjury, but I've yet to see that happen in a family case ever. Um, but, if the case is finalized and there's a child support number awarded and that number was impacted by your lies, then obviously it opens you up to relitigation and having to potentially pay attorney's fees and much more financially if the other side finds out and can prove it.
Yeah. And it goes back, like I said too, um, in order in a child support case, most of the time, not all the time, right? It always depends, but most of the time when you're doing this, you go to court, you're not just, one parent doesn't just get on the stand and be like, "Oh yeah, I make $46,000 a year. And this is it." You've got paycheck stubs, you got bank account records.
Hopefully.
There's financial documents. There's evidence that goes along to prove this. And like I said, not always, but most of the time. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you're saying one thing, but the documents are saying something else, right? You want to make sure. Um, are there instances where people lie? Yes, 100%. You got to
And
think
and that's frustrating,
it is.
especially for the party that is supposed to be receiving the support. They lived with that person. They shared finances with that person. They say, I know that that person makes X number more dollars under the table in cash every third Thursday of the month at, whatever. Okay, well, now we have to prove that. And yes, your testimony is evidence in and of itself, but usually for the judge to impute that as income or add that on to what you're making when calculating child support, they're going to want probably a little bit more than he said, she said on the dollar amount.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important that one, the parent seeking child support, like you said, understands how difficult it is. You can't just
Mhm.
go in and say, "Hey, my ex, like you said, makes money on the side or whatever it is." Um, I have to tell you this story, then I want to talk about intentional underemployment real fast. But I have to tell you this story real fast. I'll never forget. I was in Hayes County, Texas, and we were doing a divorce case, and the we had resolved all the kiddo issues. We'd actually gone for a hearing that day, and we ended up settling most of it like like not normally, but oftentimes do prior to going in front of the judge. And the only outstanding issue we had at this time was child support.
Okay.
And my client, God bless him, he worked for Domino's.
I
And
remember this
yes, oh
case.
yeah,
Yep.
and he worked for Domino's, and he had a paycheck stub, and we had all this stuff. He said, "Here's what he makes," right?
It's like
And
being a server, and here's my paycheck for $2.13 an
right,
hour.
right, right. It wasn't very much, and so we kind of understood that. And so we kind of
Mhm.
we had agree, or well, we didn't agree. We understood that he made more income, and I'll never forget. Opposing counsel just kept saying, "No, he's making more money, more money, more money." We know, we know, we know. And finally, I kicked my chair back and I said, "Okay, how much is he making? He works at Domino's. He's delivering pizzas. How much?" And they said they thought he was making $1,500 a week in cash delivering pizzas.
I quit.
And I told him, that's exactly what I said. I said, "Look," I said, I laughed, obviously. But then I got done. I said, "I tell you what, boss, here's the deal. If my guy's making $1,500 cash
Talking about like
per week,
72K a
right, right,
year.
right. Making, delivering pizzas in his car. That's it. That's all he's doing." I said, "Man, I will quit my job today and go do that. It's got to be less." And the guy's just looking at me. I'm like, "You're never going to prove it. Like, you're
It's
never going
so
to
it's
prove,
so
right?"
strange sometimes what opposing counsel or opposing party will lean on. I through law school worked at a bar, worked at a few bars, And I remember representing someone that was my boss at one of those places. And opposing counsel came over and said, well, I'm clearly conflicted out of this case because the case involves child support. And since I worked at the same bar that my client worked
Right.
at one point, I understand that. Like, I understand
Right.
tips and how much. I said, okay, so anyone that's
Good
worked
work.
at a bar ever or has been a server can't rep this guy.
Right.
Let's bring it in front of the judge. Let's
Yeah.
see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's silliness. I'll say this, going back to your question though, real fast. I know I got on a tangent, but the question was, can you get in trouble for not accurately disclosing your information or your financial information? One of the things that happens is the court can impute income. What that means is the court can find that you are intentionally underemployed, right? So if you go in, this happens a lot where, like, one person's going to go in and say, hey, look, I only make X number of
You're
dollars.
making on paper $200K a year. The next month, a modification is filed, and somehow within 2 weeks now, you're making $54,000 a year
Yeah,
on paper.
right. And so, you may be, a professional, you may have a job, a certain job or a skill set, right? And
Mhm.
so you make so much. And the court can look at you and say, yeah, that's great, but I still believe that you could go make X number of dollars,
And we'll
right?
set child support based on that
And
number.
all right, they'll impute it, or they'll basically say you could be making this much money. And so if you don't accurately disclose it, the court has the ability to go in. They have the D word. The D word's discretion. They've got some
Mm.
discretion based on the testimony and the evidence that's been entered into evidence. And so the court can do that. Again, going back, you want to have as much proof as you can. You want the presentation to be supported by testimony, but more importantly, by evidence documents, and so that way you don't have to deal with that situation. But again, child support should be a math problem. A lot of feelings that come along with it.
Mhm.
It's not always as straightforward as you'd want it to be. So let's call that good for today.
That's great.
Want to? Cool. Um, how was your drink?
It was good.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Want another one?
Probably.
All right, let's do
But on
that.
a beach.
All right. Well, I don't know that's going to happen today. Guys, thanks for hanging out with us today. Episode 10 here at Cases and Cocktails. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any of it.
Thanks, guys.